Hello all and welcome back to The Sequel Was Worse Than the Original. At this point, this has just become its own series. Today we're going to be talking about Subnautica Below Zero. All joking aside, this game isn't that bad. It's enjoyable to play, but there are still a lot of problems with it, and it was still worse than the original Subnautica, and we're going to go over exactly why that is. We aren't going to talk too much about the story and lore of Subnautica Below Zero, but we are still going to talk about it, so I will still give a spoiler warning here. To start off, we are going to compare the way that the story of each of the games are presented to you. Back in the original Subnautica, it started you off with a cutscene of a ship explosion to explain why you see it in the middle of the ocean. As you go about the beginning of the game, you will get radio messages from various life pods that you can go explore throughout the map that will give you small pieces of the full story. Eventually, you get another radio message for the sunbeam that will come and attempt to save you, which will arrive on one of the only 2 islands in the game. It won't really give you any lore, but it will still direct you to the islands, which you will find more lore there, as well as the main gun, which will start your journey searching through the alien technology. But after this, the game stops holding your hand. It's up to you to find the story. If you want to escape the planet successfully, you will need to keep finding the lore-based locations, but if not, it won't force you. You can choose to keep building your base and going wherever you would like to go. The game basically turns into a sandbox like Minecraft. You can choose to go fight the Ender Dragon, but it's not at all necessary. You just go wherever you'd like to and build cool bases. The game won't even remind you of these locations. It just lets you do whatever you want and leaves the main character fully and completely anonymous. Below Zero, on the other hand, starts with a very descriptive cutscene that already lets you look into the life of the main character. Within the first 10 minutes of the game, you learn the main character's entire backstory and her sister's. It's such a disorienting 180 from the last game straight off the bat, and this is just the beginning. A little bit later, you find the best character in the game, Al-An, which is an AI that contains itself within your brain. From here on out, you are literally told the story of the game from a character that is in your head with alerts showing you where it is that you need to go, making it very hard for you to ignore these locations. Now, let's look at the actual story elements of these 2 games. The regular Subnautica is very focused on the sea creatures in the game, while you discover little bits of the leftover precursor technology. You get 3 random cutscene-ish moments where a random creature speaks to you telepathically for no more than 10 seconds at a time. You end up going deeper and deeper into the planet until you find the smartest and largest living creature in that game, the Sea Emperor Leviathan. It starts telling you about its struggles in containment and gets you to help its species thrive once again by hatching its eggs. Once you do so, you also heal the planet-wide epidemic that caused the entirety of it to be kept in quarantine and lets you go back to your home planet. However, in Below Zero, the entire story was focused on the precursors and the trouble that your sister fell into. At first glance, this is very good. The game is focusing on a different version of the world and is not an exact copy of the previous story. However, the main story of this game doesn't seem like it really knows what it wants. It goes back and forth between randomly talking about the precursor race and then your sister's disappearance. But the worst part is how you progress through the story. Throughout the game, Al-An speaks to you telepathically, which progresses the story and gets you to go deeper and deeper into the planet until you find the largest and most advanced creatures in the game, ending up at where Al-An's body can be fabricated. He continues to fully go into a deep dive about his struggles being contained in a box and gets you to help it thrive with its species once again by giving it back its body. Once you do so, you bring it back to its home planet. The actual story may not be an exact copy of the original game, but the way the story develops is. You are spoken to by a telepathic creature that brings you deeper into the planet to help it escape its quarantine and bring characters back to their home planets. It just feels like the exact same as the last game, which is very underwhelming, except this time it's always being pushed into your face. The next topic I want to discuss is the main thing that made the original Subnautica absolutely terrifying. The feeling of isolation. You are completely and utterly alone in the entire game. You keep getting random moments of hope with radio messages and abandoned bases that maybe there is someone still out there. But then you reach the location and the bases are destroyed with no sign of life. This makes moments like these, where you're just out in the vast ocean with nothing around except scary noises from the terrifying monsters that lurk below, absolutely horrifying. In Below Zero, though, you are not the only one on this island. When you first encounter this survivor, it's an amazing moment where you completely freak out that you're finally not alone. But this turns out to be a terrible detriment to the actual gameplay experience. Many locations that you need to reach throughout the game are alternate bases for Marguerite. They're not just alternate active bases of hers, but she is physically there anytime you go to them. It completely destroys the terrifying feel of isolation that the other game built up, because now you have multiple safe spaces where you can see another person. In the last game, you still had to worry about the stability of your bases with its energy and durability, and while you still have to do the same in this game, there are still multiple large active bases that you don't have to worry about at all, and you can just go there for a breather collecting food and water. Now let's talk about the actual gameplay of Below Zero compared to the original Subnautica. The original Subnautica game had a pretty cool terrain, at least for the time. There were vast scapes of grassy hills, shallow, shell-infested waters, pretty mushroom bulbscapes, and scary volcanoes. Below Zero is very different from this. It starts off with the most beautiful landscape that has ever been seen in Subnautica. Pretty colors, amazing arches, and beautiful creatures. This puts Below Zero on an absolutely incredibly high pedestal. But, well, let's just say that it doesn't stay there. Most of the other terrains are just bland, empty, and boring. There's one biome with the ground looks like they didn't know if they wanted craters or plates. Then there's the thermal spires, which are literally just thermal spires. That's it, weaving through thermal spires in a grayscape. Luckily, there are a few locations that are actually cool, but even these cool places are very flawed. There's the copper mining site, which is an amazing idea for this game, and it's absolutely terrifying going down into it, but there's just rock punchers everywhere. There's basically only rock punchers, and the sheer amount of them makes them feel goofy. Then we get to the Crystal Caves. This is an absolutely stunning looking location, but the feel of this place instantly goes away with the shadow leviathans. This is basically the only fauna that you will stumble across here. You'll find the occasional tiny bladderfish or goofy rock puncher, but it's basically just the shadow leviathans chasing you everywhere you go. The equivalent of this location in the last Subnautica is the lava zone, where there's a lot of sea dragon leviathans everywhere, which is the most deadly living creature in that game, but at least you can get away from them and go places that you won't run into them. This location is basically just Shadow Leviathan Central. The final biome I want to take a look at is the glacial biomes. This is Below Zero's equivalent of the floating islands, but the glacial biomes are much bigger. This was a very exciting aspect of Below Zero when we saw the trailers. You have a terrifying ice worm that chases you on a hover bike, and it looks awesome. And then you finally get to it in the game, and what is this? It's just so bland and empty. There's nothing going on except ice stalkers and the ice worm that pops up way too frequently. They turned the ice worm from an amazing threat to a terrible nuisance. There's also just nothing to do here. There's one location that you can go, and then that's it. At least on the floating islands, it made sense that there wasn't that much to do because they were tiny floating islands. But here, it just seems like there wasn't any care for the player that went into it. Only ways to make the trailer look cool. It's just all so disappointing. The final point I want to talk about here is the unfinished feel of the game. I know that in every one of these videos I say that the game feels unfinished, but it's sadly all true. These games genuinely are just unfinished. I started talking about this in the last point I mentioned, but there are so many locations that just feel empty. The glacier biomes have almost nothing to them, and then most locations are just in between biomes to get to another place. Don't get me wrong, Subnautica 1 had 2 locations that somewhat felt like this, and they were the Lost River and the Lava Lakes. However, the original Subnautica connected a lot of secret locations to the Lost River that were very big additions to the actual story of the game, and the Lava Lakes also connected multiple containment facilities that were necessary to reach. Below Zero just felt like it was making biomes as if it was making levels in a platformer just to make it more challenging to complete. The Crystal Caves is just full of leviathans that lead to the cache at the end, and then you make your journey back out of it with nothing else to do. The Deep Lily Pads biome also only connects to the Deep Lily Pads cache. There's just no point in these. They made them so that you have to go through another area to complete the game. It's just so incredibly disappointing to have these types of problems after the awesome game that was the original Subnautica. I really hope that in the new Subnautica game, if it will truly be a Subnautica game, we get back into the swing of things by both mixing up the formula, but in the correct areas. Below Zero mixed up the story, which was good, but everything else just seemed like a carbon copy, basically. Once again, what I always like to do at the end of these videos is give credit where credit is due. This game gave a lot of information to the main overarching story of the Subnautica universe. It also established a new way to make bases using actual rooms. They added room dividers and new base connections that were so good that they ended up adding them to the original Subnautica game fairly recently. But really, there's not much more to give this game. It's cold Subnautica, but done worse. And that's why Subnautica Below Zero is much worse than Subnautica.